Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Mini Diaries. Today, judging from the weather, I will be talking about my winter setup on my classic Mini. It's a setup that I consider to be of essential nature for making sure the trip will be a success regardless of the weather conditions I will be driving through. I know I'm roughly planning to start the trip in June. I seriously doubt the way things are going with COVID-19 and stuff that I will start in June. And given the number of countries I actually plan on visiting, I think winter is going to find me somewhere in Scandinavia. So I need to be prepared, and it's better preparing myself now in Greece rather than improvising on the road. Today I'm going to be discussing two topics. One of them is a quickie, putting snow chains on a classic Mini and whether they actually fit or not. And the other one has to do with the winter setup on my cooling system, because Minis during the winter do have an overcooling problem. Not an overheating one, not the summertime. They overcool themselves quite badly. So let's take a look at that. Overcooling an engine, a classic Mini engine? Are we even remotely serious about this? These little buggers are notorious for frying eggs, literally, on the radiators during spring or summertime. Well, this ain't spring and this ain't summertime. It's a full-blown, Greek full-blown winter, and the Mini, of course, will come up with its own brand new sets of problems of overcooling. The root cause of the problem is the fact that it actually has a cooling fan which is driven by a belt, which, as long as the engine is turning, that fan is cooling your engine without anything to stop it. This is perfectly fine for the summer. This is not fine for winter though. You get too much cooling for your engine, and that means that the car is constantly struggling to even remotely meet its operating temperature, which is 83 degrees. If people tell you, or anyone tells you, that it's pretty okay to run an overcooled engine and no problems with it, I think the people in the white robes should come and fetch that person and take him out of harm's way. If I'm cold and I don't feel okay, the car's cold and it doesn't feel okay either. It's not really proper to run your engine cold. Your air fuel mixture gets mixed up, your engine has a tendency to run richer than normal. The metals, the pistons, the piston rings, the valve, nothing has actually expanded to the degrees or the tolerances that must be met for it to be running properly. So if your car is running cold, that's not a good thing. My approach to that is I'm gonna try and skip the fixed fan altogether, so I will just rely on an auxiliary fan. But that setup needs a bit of twitching about, so let's see what that's all about. The moment we've all been waiting for, what I actually intend on doing with my radiator. A couple of things. The shroud here, the black shroud, is quite important because this is the side that mounts, this bracket is the one that mounts the radiator onto the gearbox and gives it its exact positioning as to the engine. So I will keep the shroud. I don't want to fiddle about with it too much. Again, the modification I'm about to do is going to be of such a design or nature, so to speak, that if at any given moment in time I want to revert back to the original, I can do so without any problems. This is how this is mounted on the car. And this is my auxiliary fan right here. That's the auxiliary fan that was installed in the car on the inner wing. Okay? And though it was kind of okay for an auxiliary fan, it's also very noisy, and it doesn't really pull that much air through the radiator. So I figured I should go for a better design and something that's definitely more reliable, because this is kind of getting old and I want my Bob to be as reliable and trustworthy as possible. So I'm skipping to a different design. I'm switching actually to a different design, which is this one. That's the kind of fan I'll be using for my setup. The big advantage of it is that though this one, the old one, is quite wide and there's absolutely no way I can fit this in the car, without having to chop the Mini up, and I don't really want to do that. Look at how thin that one is, okay, in comparison. Compare the two fans. I'm saving so much space with the newer fan installation I want to do. This is the actual setup in the car the way it is right now. So roughly, I have this gap in between the auxiliary fan and my radiator, okay? Because this is basically the wing of the car and there's the grille and there's a lot of gap. So when this one runs, it will not necessarily pull air from where I want it to pull air. It will actually pull air from the sides, from here, from everywhere. And this is not an efficient design. Shoved at the side of the engine bay, the radiator has no way of seeing direct airflow, meaning the fan is burdened with the task of not only pulling air through, but forcing it through a 90-degree turn through the radiator. With the auxiliary fan situated inside the wing of the car, you're left with a gap the size of Grand Canyon in terms of airflow. The resulting leakage is immense, and unless you actually want to fry eggs on your radiator, you need to come up with some way of shrouding that gap off completely. I kid you not. Naturally, I decided to have a go at my own homemade, handmade leather shroud design. It is needless to say, of course, that an entire morning was taken up by my bright idea, and though the final result was christened with relative success, the persisting air leaks combined to the actual complexity of the design suggested that I should change my approach to something more practical. So the approach this time around is to actually move the fan forward and have it installed on the radiator, just like that. And look at how nicely this fits. Just look at it. It's a beauty. So by doing this, I have no gap whatsoever in between my fan and the radiator. You could actually safely say it's airtight, so to speak. So that's exactly what I'm going to try and do and install today before the snow kicks in and I need to get Bob out of the yard. It actually looks cool, and with a bit of luck, I will be able to slide my radiator and fan assembly as a whole unit without actually chopping up the inner wing. So let's see how that goes. What I really liked about this fan is it comes with installation brackets which actually fit in here, and it will actually make my life a lot easier in trying to figure out the best way of securing the fan onto the radiator. Let me think this through and I'll come back with the actual installation plan. Alright, so basically I've installed all 4 brackets and they fit nicely. The reason why I love these brackets is that they actually slide in and out, and you can actually rotate the bracket to whatever angle you want, and then I'm going to mark them off and bend them to use the already existing screws on the side, these ones, for them, and try and make it work without messing anything up. Though slightly time consuming, the actual process itself was surprisingly easy. Using any straight piece of metal to mark your brackets off will be perfect for the job. Though until you come to grips with the process, I do advise you buying a couple of extras just in case you mess up. With the bracket firmly secured in the vise, it's time to use the foundational tool of engineering and give it a good banging until it comes into the desired shape. Keep on hammering down on the bracket because you actually enjoy it, and once your engineering ego feels satisfied, remove it from the vise and feast your eyes on your finished product, not forgetting to praise the Lord for not losing a finger in the process. Run a check for clearance, bolt it down, and make sure there's no residual stress left pulling on the fan assembly, because you will break it while in operation. Mark the remaining part of the brackets that needs to be hacked off, and you're pretty much done. Alright, so after some fiddling about, this is the finished product, so to speak. It's a nice, compact, really sturdy installation. So all I have to do now is remove everything again, hack off the excess metal from the brackets, and that's pretty much ready to be installed, guys, and I'm pretty excited to see how that will fit onto the car. It looks cool. Last but not least is making sure that the fan actually works. Not only that, that it spins in the proper direction. Remember, for this specific application, this needs to be a pulling fan, not a pushing one. Otherwise, the Mini will fry up. And that's basically what 1,350 cubic meters of air per hour sound like. Hack off that excess metal from the brackets and you're ready to run your first fitting test on the car. The lower mount is on already. It kind of fits, so the trick is now to make sure all the holes on this bracket, the upper bracket, align. And just by looking at it, it will not, right? So it's just about 1 centimeter off. It needs to come towards the wing. And the reason why I insist so much in maintaining all original brackets, dimensions, fixings and mountings on this one is in case this one fails, meaning it doesn't cool my radiator enough, I want to be able to reinstall the fixed fan on the water pump. And for that to happen, all these holes must line up, and they don't. So I'm gonna have to resort to some brutal measures to do that. And that is spot on. And there is room to move. And I can also fit the fan. I can fit the other fan as well, if I need to. Cool. When it's time to put everything back together and you actually think you have all your ducks in a row, is when the mini karma kicks in. Apparently, the Austin engineers have done their best to come up with 1,000,000 possible spots within that tiny engine bay for nuts and bolts and washers to disappear into the abyss of oblivion forever. A half an hour's work was quickly transformed into a 4-hour ordeal, and with the menacing weather hovering over my head, I really had to get my act together and get Bob all ready to go for the road and out of the yard before the snow kicked in. And I'm afraid that's all the time I had for today. I know I promised to cover 2 topics in one episode, one of them being a quickie, but then again, when did something turn into a quickie on a classic Mini? Join me in the next episode of the Mini Diaries, where Bob and I are venturing off to the snowy boonies for plenty of fun and a bit of an adventure. Though the plan was to test out my cooling contraptions, I ended up getting a lot more than what I actually bargained for. But so far, this is nice.